Even while mapping out the getaway route of the sedan caught on the adjacent security lens, detectives keep circling back to one agonizing riddle. What made Nancy Guthrie the ultimate target? She was an 84-year-old grandmother enjoying a peaceful retirement in Tucson, sticking to a remarkably predictable, mundane daily schedule. Absolutely zero aspects of her background hinted that she would eventually anchor a terrifying enigma capable of gripping the entire country. Still, an unknown threat rolled into her quiet enclave during the dead of night. A shadowed figure marched right up to her front door. Following that chilling encounter, the beloved senior citizen vanished into the ether. That tiny digital snippet grabbed by the adjacent doorbell lens now stands as the absolute first visual breadcrumb tied to her vanishing. An unidentified sedan creeping into the subdivision mere moments prior to the prowler's manifestation at the residence remains the crucial focal point. Figuring out exactly what kind of ride that was could finally point detectives straight to the person calling the shots in the driver's seat that evening. Yet putting a name to the face behind the wheel won't actually solve the most haunting piece of this puzzle. Why exactly did they pull up to that spot to begin with? Was this simply a crime of opportunity committed by a predator hunting for an easy mark? Or did someone deliberately single out Nancy Guthrie based on a dark motive that detectives still haven't managed to piece together? As of right now, police are meticulously combing through absolutely every shred of evidence available, tearing apart surveillance clips and picking apart what bystanders claim to have seen. They are holding out hope that just a single, solitary clue will finally bridge the gaps and make this whole twisted picture make sense. After all, lurking somewhere far beyond the borders of those peaceful suburban streets, the exact individual who vanished, Nancy Guthrie, is still breathing free air. Once that ultimate piece of the puzzle drops, the boring security footage a local resident almost completely blew off could end up being the exact spark that blows this entire cold case wide open. We are following a massive breaking update from Arizona regarding the ongoing hunt for 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. She is widely known as the mother of the beloved Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie. But before diving in, please hit that subscribe button since your support pushes these urgent stories into the spotlight. Surprisingly, law enforcement officers might not be the ones responsible for unearthing the most critical piece of evidence in this entire investigation. That pivotal breakthrough actually originated from a residential doorbell camera situated directly across the road, catching a subtle detail the homeowner spotted while skimming through footage from that fateful evening. It was merely a solitary vehicle creeping into the subdivision shortly before 2 o'clock in the morning, which initially seemed completely harmless. Tucson is famous for these tranquil residential stretches where every single home goes pitch black, leaving zero pedestrians or visible activity outdoors. Suddenly, twin high beams slice through the darkness at the block's edge, illuminating a ride that creeps past the properties as though the motorist is meticulously sizing up each residence. The driver never hits the gas to speed through the avenue, nor do they flip a U-turn like a confused tourist. They deliberately press onward. They loiter exactly long enough to get caught on the digital lens before melting away into the depths of the housing development. Only a few short hours after that mysterious cruise, the beloved matriarch vanished without a trace. This 84-year-old grandmother struggled with her mobility, required a strict regimen of daily prescriptions, and literally needed a pacemaker to stay alive, making her the absolute last person who could ever hurt a fly. Despite her vulnerability, an unknown intruder breached her property under the cover of darkness, executing a sinister plot that detectives now suspect was orchestrated meticulously in advance. Once the authorities finally got their hands on that digital security recording to dissect the frames, a glaring discrepancy emerged. The timestamp was an instant red flag, showing the mystery automobile rolling through mere moments before a disguised individual materialized right by Nancy Guthrie's front door. In a flash, that seemingly mundane snippet captured by a basic porch lens transformed into a chilling piece of criminal evidence. It genuinely felt like the genesis of a nightmare, proving an assailant infiltrated the area with extreme precision, prompting cops to pursue one burning inquiry. Did a random commuter just happen to take a late-night detour? Or were those the very headlights of the monster hunting for this elderly woman? As word of this horrific abduction trickled through the grapevine, the surrounding suburb responded with the exact type of shell-shocked panic you would expect from a peaceful haven. The sheer impossibility of the situation brought a massive swarm of blinking cruiser lights to their normally serene doorsteps. Law enforcement officers canvassed the entire block, knocking on every single door to grill the locals about any bizarre activity they might have witnessed overnight. Those interrogations felt like a fever dream to the residents, mainly because their idyllic community had absolutely zero history of this caliber of violent trauma. Fortunately, a property situated just a stone's throw from Nancy's possessed the holy grail of modern investigative tools. An outward-facing surveillance system had been hooked up by a neighbor several months prior, purely for basic home protection and peace of mind. The guy essentially treated the tech like everyone else does, using it to monitor incoming mail deliveries and screen uninvited porch guests. On a typical evening, the lens rarely caught anything spicier than transient beams of light or a random stray dog trotting down the asphalt. However, the shocking revelation of a kidnapping right in his own backyard flipped a switch in his mind. This concerned citizen took it upon himself to rewind the digital tape from that eerie twilight window, totally unprepared for what he might uncover. Let us be brutally honest. The vast majority of civilian surveillance clips yield absolutely useless, mind-numbing boredom during a manhunt. Nevertheless, a gut instinct compelled him to investigate, though the initial nighttime hours displayed the standard sleepy suburban aesthetic. The pavement was completely barren, while a handful of exterior bulbs cast a gentle, yellow halo onto the manicured lawns. A sporadic automobile would occasionally break the silence, yet the mundane vibe shattered right as the digital clock approached 2 o'clock in the morning. Searing bright lights punctured the pitch-black horizon before an unidentified set of wheels lazily drifted into the camera's field of view. Rather than zipping by the property like a normal motorist would, this creeping sedan crawled down the tarmac at a snail's pace. Those glowing beams completely bathed the neighboring facades, throwing a harsh spotlight on parked cars and front yards as the prowler pushed onward. Looking back, the homeowner characterized the driving style as incredibly deliberate. It was absolutely the calculated prowl of a predator, hyper-fixated on their environment, rather than a commuter trying to get home. Believe it or not, the guy came dangerously close to deleting the file altogether without giving it a second thought. People certainly take midnight drives for perfectly innocent reasons, but the exact chronological placement of this event kept gnawing at his conscience. Being fully aware that law enforcement pinned the abduction to this precise graveyard shift timeline forced him to take action. Backing up that file was a game changer, as detectives instantly seized the recording to construct a rock-solid sequence of events. The embedded digital clock proved this ghost car breached the perimeter mere seconds before a disguised prowler was caught lurking around the elderly woman's property. Uncovering that chronological overlap completely flipped the script for the authorities, cementing the theory that this midnight cruiser was anything but a coincidence. It strongly indicated the exact second the perpetrator touched down on the scene, meaning that mysterious automobile was likely the prime suspect's personal ride. This revelation meant the task force officially secured the very first visual breadcrumb directly linked to this heinous act. It served as the crucial foundational block for piecing together the terrifying puzzle of that fateful evening. Yet, the deeper the crime scene analysts dug into those pixels, they noticed an incredibly disturbing behavioral pattern regarding how the driver navigated that desolate road. That tiny detail, however, opened the door to a much more terrifying scenario. Seasoned investigators digging through surveillance video almost never stop at the surface level because the smallest clues frequently hold the biggest secret. Here, the true smoking gun wasn't simply the fact that a car happened to drive by, it was all about the motion. Since the automobile caught on that doorbell camera certainly wasn't cruising the streets like a regular commuter. Under typical circumstances, everyday drivers keep a fairly consistent pace while navigating through quiet suburbs. Motorists who happen to get lost usually hit the gas a little harder, rushing to get back onto a familiar highway. Yet the ride caught on tape that evening visibly hit the brakes upon entering the subdivision, its high beams washing slowly over the front lawns. That mysterious sedan lingered in the camera's frame for just a fraction too long, breaking the normal rhythm of nighttime traffic. For the detectives on the case, this sparked an urgent debate. Was the person behind the wheel hunting for a target? Criminal behavioral analysts know that predators meticulously scout their hunting grounds, often creeping along at a snail's pace to case the environment. These prowlers are typically hunting for specific addresses or double-checking local markers to get their bearings. Or they are simply ensuring the coast is clear, and the cautious crawl of this particular car hinted at a driver conducting heavy surveillance. Of course, creeping down a dark street doesn't automatically make someone guilty of a felony. However, once law enforcement cross-referenced that tape with the rest of their clues, the timeline lined up far too perfectly to be a coincidence. This strange vehicle rolled onto the scene just minutes before authorities suspect the killer walked up to Nancy Guthrie's front door. Assuming the driver ditched their ride just down the block, it perfectly sets up how that disguised intruder suddenly walked into frame. This chilling theory blew the case wide open, sending cops scrambling to see if any nearby security systems had also captured the prowler. Today's suburban sprawls are absolute fortresses of digital eyes, completely packed with smart doorbells and motion-activated security feeds. And with floodlight lenses pointed down from almost every garage, finding that exact same car on another feed could give the task force a literal roadmap, revealing exactly where it breached the neighborhood and every corner it navigated. It might even reveal their escape route, because a car's unique silhouette and beam spread can crack a case even without a legible tag. Yet there was another alarming layer to this video. The vehicle never once paused in confusion or attempted a U-turn. The driver glided down the asphalt with absolute certainty, giving off the distinct vibe that they were already intimately familiar with the route. This gut-wrenching realization pushed the homicide squad toward a terrifying conclusion they really wanted to avoid. Could the mastermind behind Nancy Guthrie's vanishing act have previously stalked these very same streets? If the culprit had scouted the location beforehand, they wouldn't need to search at all. They'd make a beeline straight for Nancy Guthrie's property. This sinister angle prompted authorities to start grilling every single person who had any ties to the victim whatsoever. They needed to figure out who already possessed her home address, carefully weaving this doorbell video into the overarching chronological puzzle of her abduction. Nailing down the precise hour and minute of every single event that evening was absolutely critical to solving the mystery. Based on the initial reports gathered by the police department at the time, Nancy was safely tucked inside her house as night fell, and absolutely nothing about that evening felt remotely threatening. The folks next door didn't hear a peep, and 0 distress calls came from her landline. But as midnight passed, the atmosphere shifted drastically. A menacing, disguised phantom suddenly materialized on the lens right outside of her front door. Dressed completely in black, the intruder rocked heavy gloves and a thick face covering to conceal their identity from the world. The clip only lasted a few seconds, yet the cops got a crystal clear look at the stranger hovering ominously on the front steps. The events immediately following that recording remain a total black hole, though mapping out the hours finally cracked open a massive lead. The fact that the suspicious car rolled into the block just moments prior heavily implied that the two incidents were deeply intertwined. Stashing the getaway ride around the corner would be the perfect way for an attacker to sneak up to Nancy's doorstep completely undetected. Suburban enclaves are practically ghost towns when the sun goes down and the moon is high. By 2 o'clock, the entire block is dead to the world, leaving empty roads illuminated solely by scattered front yard lamps. A local would definitely bank on this. Anyone plotting a stealthy ambush would absolutely pick that specific hour to guarantee there wouldn't be a single set of waking eyes around. Criminal psychologists spend their entire careers dissecting exactly why a bad guy chooses to strike at a particular second. The timing of an attack usually proves just how well the predator knows the turf, and hitting at 2 in the morning provides a very specific tactical advantage. Total silence, 0 traffic, absolutely no witnesses, and virtually no risk of disruption. The timeline in the Guthrie file strongly hints that the stalker creeping up to her porch had meticulously calculated every single one of those variables. That vehicle, caught on the doorbell footage, could actually pinpoint the exact second the perpetrator pulled up to ensure the block was completely dead. Should this theory hold up, that tiny recording device essentially documented the opening move of the entire offense, marking the distinct shift from plotting to execution. However, detectives were still left facing one incredibly massive, unanswered puzzle. Assuming the perpetrator drove in under the cover of darkness, where exactly did their ride vanish to later? After all, the person behind the wheel had to exit that sleepy subdivision at some point, and it stands to reason that another surveillance lens caught their departure. As law enforcement kept dissecting the automobile from the neighbor's doorbell feed, they simultaneously shifted their gaze toward a different clip that was already making headlines across the country. That specific video actually originated from the security system installed right above Nancy Guthrie's front porch. Although exceptionally brief, the recording uncovered a chilling detail that authorities simply could not afford to brush aside. A completely disguised silhouette was caught lingering right outside Nancy Guthrie's front door. Dressed in completely black attire and hand coverings, the intruder kept their identity concealed, creeping up to the entryway and pausing there for quite a while before eventually vanishing from the frame. The video obviously failed to document every single horrific event that unfolded during that dark evening. However, it handed detectives a crucial, terrifying look at the intruder who targeted her residence long before the sun ever came up. The authorities finally decided to cross-reference the exact timestamps from her security video with the footage provided by the people next door. The connection between the two was glaringly obvious, as the automobile creeping into the subdivision showed up just a few minutes prior to the disguised prowler lurking at the entrance. Such an incredibly tight time frame immediately brought up a massive, game-changing theory for the case. It was highly likely that the perpetrator parked their ride nearby and casually walked the rest of the way to the targeted property. Yet, authorities spotted another deeply disturbing element hidden in the door camera video, as the prowler showed absolutely zero signs of fear or anxiety. Typically, amateur lawbreakers attempting an unplanned hit give off extreme vibes of intense anxiety. They dart around frantically, checking over their shoulders and hurrying to finish the job, whereas the chilling figure at Nancy Guthrie's place operated with a totally different rhythm. Every single step looked deliberate, steady, and chillingly relaxed, a specific trait that instantly grabbed the focus of the profiling experts consulting on the case. Seeing an offender act so incredibly chill right in the middle of a crime scene is always a huge red flag. It strongly hints that they have likely been in this exact kind of high-stakes, terrifying scenario before. A person who has fantasized about the act countless times often lacks anxiety when it actually happens, and it frequently means the perpetrator meticulously scouted the location beforehand. Just loitering outside a completely silent house at 2 in the morning is terrifying for most. That specific hour would usually trigger massive anxiety for anyone breaking the law, but this guy just chilled there without a care in the world. This incredibly chilling realization pushed the entire team of detectives to confront a much darker theory. Was it entirely possible that the perpetrator had actually visited this exact residence prior to the brutal attack? A prior guest would instantly know the layout of the entryway, the exact design of the steps, and precisely how fast the homeowner would answer a knock. Having that kind of inside knowledge undeniably gives a perpetrator way more swagger than some random thief just showing up completely blind. The absolute lack of fear caught on tape heavily pointed to a grim reality that the police simply could not overlook. The shady individual lurking outside Nancy Guthrie's place probably wasn't exploring the property as a total rookie. It is highly likely that this person knew precisely what they were walking into. Should that theory hold water, the entire puzzle of her vanishing gets incredibly twisted, heavily implying the culprit wasn't just some random drifter. This particular person might have actually possessed an intimate, terrifying understanding of the exact location they targeted. After the cops finally figured out that the car from the doorbell cam likely belonged to the attacker, their path forward was blatantly obvious. They absolutely had to track its original starting point and, significantly more crucially, its exact getaway route. Authorities immediately widened their intensive surveillance dragnet way past the immediate block. Suburban tracks are typically loaded with countless private security devices that trigger and film absolutely anything moving in the dark. Police systematically knocked on doors all over the adjoining blocks, begging locals to check their digital feeds for any extra clips from that specific time frame. Their ultimate mission was incredibly straightforward: map out the getaway car's entire escape route. Spotting the ride across several lenses would allow the team to essentially map out its exact trajectory into the subdivision, even if reading the actual tags was completely impossible. Just identifying the make, model, and paint job would give them plenty to work with and narrow down the suspect pool. Vehicles generally stick to very standard, highly predictable traffic patterns. They naturally cruise through crosswalks, stoplights, and connecting avenues that are practically guaranteed to have some form of surveillance coverage. By stitching together various video clips from all over town, the authorities can frequently map out a suspect's full drive leading up to and fleeing from a major hit. Law enforcement expanded their search by pulling footage from stoplight lenses along the main avenues bordering the community. Those elevated cameras routinely catch glimpses of passing cars navigating the primary cross streets. Should the perpetrator's ride have cruised past one of these checkpoints right before slipping into the subdivision, police could potentially map out their exact route into town. Simultaneously, an entirely different theory began taking shape among the squad. Detectives weighed a completely alternative scenario regarding the culprit's origins. Could the person behind the wheel actually be a local resident? Assuming the perpetrator resided right there in that very district, their commute to the crime scene would have been virtually non-existent. That would perfectly explain how the ride seemingly vanished into thin air upon exiting the immediate block. Yet, even a vanishing act of that nature leaves behind a solid breadcrumb trail. Locals usually have a remarkably sharp eye for the everyday rides cruising up and down their familiar blocks. A vigilant bystander could recall spotting a matching sedan idling around the corner or creeping down the block on a previous afternoon. Quite frequently, these tiny details noticed by everyday folks turn out to be the golden ticket to cracking a case wide open. For this exact reason, detectives relentlessly knocked on doors to interview the surrounding homeowners. They pressed every resident for memories of an unfamiliar ride creeping along the pavement during the pre-dawn darkness of that fateful Tuesday. Ultimately, that silent snippet caught by the doorbell lens could harbor far darker secrets than initially presumed. The footage potentially documents the precise second a predator rolled into the subdivision with malicious intent. Should authorities manage to trace the origin point of that specific ride, the mystery might finally unravel. They would inch significantly nearer to unmasking the shadowy figure lurking on Nancy Guthrie's front steps under the cover of darkness. While the squad relentlessly tracked the car's movements and combed through the midnight recordings of the vanishing, a completely different investigative angle silently stepped into the spotlight. Human psychology took center stage. Whenever forensic clues dry up and tangible proof remains scarce, professionals pivot. Law enforcement leans heavily on psychological profiling to piece together the sequence of a tragedy. Specialists dissect the offender's physical mannerisms, their tactical decisions, and the specific terrain they target. Such behavioral footprints frequently unmask the psychological makeup of the perpetrator. Looking closely at the files, a single terrifying element commanded attention: the absolute tranquility of the prowler. That disguised silhouette caught on the front steps certainly was not acting like a desperate amateur pulling off a spontaneous, panicked job. They displayed zero erratic pacing, entirely lacked second thoughts, and showed absolutely no dread of being spotted by an insomniac next door. On the contrary, the intruder exuded a chillingly calculated demeanor. This subtle characteristic carries vastly more weight than the average citizen might assume. Psychological analysts point out that whenever a wrongdoer maintains a frosty composure during an offense, it signals a deeply disturbing truth. It strongly implies they have vividly fantasized about the execution of the deed repeatedly in their own mind. The environment lacks panic strictly because the culprit has already run through a mental dress rehearsal of the entire operation. That sinister prospect triggered an equally disturbing puzzle for the task force to ponder. Had the predator actively stalked the victim well ahead of the actual intrusion, a phantom lurking around the block over several weeks could easily soak up vital intel while remaining entirely under the radar. A voyeur could easily track the exact hour Nancy flipped off her living room lamps for the night. They could deduce her solitary living situation simply by watching from afar. Furthermore, a keen eye would spot her sluggish pace and apparent dependence on daily prescriptions. In the eyes of a monster, these mundane traits paint a giant target of defenselessness. An 84-year-old solitary woman residing on a silent block where the locals snooze heavily creates an ideal setup. Such isolated variables form the exact hunting ground that predators crave when scouting out their next potential victim. Nevertheless, the detectives remained incredibly cautious about drawing premature verdicts, considering a totally different theory remained on the table. Perhaps the culprit was never truly stalking her from the shadows down the block after all. Alternatively, the perpetrator could have harbored a pre-existing connection to the matriarch in their everyday life. An individual who had stepped foot on the property before, potentially completing a professional gig, could be the key. Dropping off packages or engaging in mundane errands would grant a visitor intimate knowledge of the property's floor plan and its exterior boundaries. That individual would instantly recognize the placement of the patio illumination. They would be well aware of the security lens positioning, ensuring they strolled up to the correct address without a hint of hesitation. Having an intimate grasp of the property's layout perfectly justifies the sheer audacity displayed on the security tape. Such inside knowledge justifies the intruder's relaxed demeanor as they lingered on the veranda without breaking a sweat. Consequently, authorities are currently battling a brand new hypothesis that severely tangles an already complex web. Whoever orchestrated this nightmare might not be a random drifter who happened to wander down that street. The mastermind was likely an acquaintance fully aware of the victim's exact coordinates. Assuming that theory holds water, hunting down the assailant suddenly morphs into an intimately dark pursuit, vastly different from initial assumptions. Despite meticulously scrubbing the video feeds and tearing apart the chronology of the evening, the mystery remains deeply obscured. The vehicle that entered that subdivision holds the key to identifying who took Nancy Guthrie. Nancy was 84 years old, lived alone, and followed a strict daily medication schedule to survive. Her vulnerability was visible to anyone watching close enough, and someone was. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie, contact Pima County at 520-351-4900 or the FBI tip portal. A reward of over $200,000 is available for any credible tip that brings her home alive. A single doorbell camera almost changed everything in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Nancy Guthrie, 84, vanished from her Tucson home in the early hours of February 1st, 2026. The breakthrough did not come from law enforcement. It came from a neighbor across the street. A residential doorbell camera caught a lone vehicle creeping through the block just before 2 a.m. The car moved at an unnaturally slow pace, headlights sweeping across homes as if sizing them up. The homeowner almost deleted the footage, but the timing nagged at him and he chose to preserve it. When detectives cross-referenced the clip, the vehicle appeared just minutes before the disguised intruder reached Nancy's door. That chronological overlap transformed an ordinary security clip into the first visual breadcrumb of the abduction. Behavioral analysts noted the intruder showed zero anxiety at the porch.com, deliberate and unhurried. That composure signals either extensive prior planning or direct prior knowledge of the property. Investigators considered two theories: a stranger who stalked from afar or someone with prior access to the home. Either way, the evidence pointed away from a random crime and toward a calculated, targeted act. Police expanded their surveillance dragnet across the entire neighborhood, pulling footage from traffic cameras and neighboring homes.